Okay. And the captions are on. Okay, here we go. All right. So today will be about your spirit in the widest possible parlance of that. And we're going to see it through the lens of tarot's wands and cups. And the reason why I thought that that is a good correlation is because, of course, fire is the element of spirit. But in this case, in terms of tarot's wands, it is a more external spirit. And with tarot's cups, it's like a more internal manifestation of spirit and spiritedness. And so we'll look at it through that lens today, although there are many different ways to look at it. For the purposes of this course, I think that this correspondence is helpful. So first, we'll try to define spirit together and what we mean when we say spirit, because our time spent together, we'll be talking about spirit. You're free to use the chat for this upcoming conversation or exercise, but we're going to do it together. So I'm not just going to be like, spirit is, because you may have a different definition from that, from your own tradition or your time in life. We'll spend about 10 minutes doing that. And let's start now. So how do you define spirit?
I think you're muted, unless it's me.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Yes, please feel free to use the chat or the unmute yourself, which is also something you're very free to do.
I don't know that I have a full definition for spirit, but just to name what comes to mind, there's this feeling of above, like being above this world, and outside of this world. And then I guess I think of how how my body is a vessel for that which is spirit and that which is outside this world.
Thank you for that, Antonine. Other folks on voice or in the chat? And I'm happy to read the chat out. Great. JT said, a multi-dimensional energy connected to the divine.
Yeah. For some reason in my background, I've often thought about both spirit and soul. And I've thought, much like Antonine said, is spirit is something maybe higher, maybe associated with the sky, with air, maybe like inspiration or aspirations, and then soul, maybe a little muckier, water, the unconscious, not quite so glorified, maybe is the word. So yeah, those are, for me, it always seems to come in a pair, kind of spirit soul, and be maybe two different aspects of this mysterious, connection to something bigger.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else? Ruby says, for me, it means energy. Like a person's spirit is the energy that they have. So spiritual would be connecting to the energy around me. Yes, thank you. For me, I think of a person's spirit or our collective spirit is an imprint that, without being fully describable, can change the material world. So that which is immaterial, that can change the material world. And it certainly encompasses many of the definitions here as well. Anything else folks want to add about spirit? How do you know you're encountering it?
I think of what Ruby named about energy, it really is vibes.
For sure. I believe in vibes. Boy, do I believe in vibes. Hi, Atanda. Very happy that you're here. If folks don't mind, I would love to give Atanda an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Oh, hello. Sorry I'm late. I was in another thing.
It's totally fine.
Hi everyone. My name is Atanda. I use they them pronouns. I am originally from Lagos, Nigeria. But I lived in Newark for 5 years and I live in Toronto. Yeah, I've always been sort of like spirituality has always been a thing that I grew up around. And that is way more normal in places like Nigeria. And but I am just diving into like the mysticism of it. And yeah, I started reading tarot cards and other cards last year. And amongst other stuff. But yeah, I'm an academic librarian right now. We'll see how long that lasts. Yeah, and I'm also just like I do knowledge work outside of that. And I consider myself to be like a knowledge worker in general. And I'm also well, I don't like the word artist, so I say that I'm a maker. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Do you have any access needs that we should be mindful of in this space?
Not at the moment. I might ask to that have some things like repeated to me if I'm not able to understand. And oh, actually, I do. If folks can try to project their voices a little bit, that would be great as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So anything else folks want to add about spirit and how we know it's around and how we define it?
Yeah, I would say I get a almost like clear, fresh feeling around what I think of spirit. Yeah, like a breath of fresh air is often my association with spirit.
Thank you. All great answers. I'm glad that we all seem to have at least a point of touching where where we can agree where spirit is, because today we're going to talk about spiritual hygiene, something I think is extremely important, and also spirit where we locate it or can locate it, although it's all over tarot, but in these two specific locations and the implications for us as folks who are politically and probably in terms of work doing certain kinds of work and or wanting to do certain kinds of work and prone or have an experience with burnout. All right, let's talk about tarot's wands. So tarot's wands are the suit that initiate action in tarot. When I say initiate action, I don't mean make you do stuff. I mean all action in tarot, right? So when in regards to the minor arcana, the wands are our opening and initiatory suit. They do not take long to act. They are associated with fire, and they are traditionally the suit of spirit. But also, and we'll be talking about this in our recorded lesson that drops this coming Thursday, we can also see from the magician, since the Fool is a movable card, that the magician's final initiation of having all of the suits in front of them is the use of the wand, right? And something that I love talking about, because I am a nerd, of course, is that the magician is an imprint both of Hermes and Thoth. So when we look at the suits of tarot, we're looking at the 4 ways that Hermes spoke to humans. How do we know that this is this and not something else? Because where tarot comes from, right? So Our oldest surviving 78 card tarot deck comes from a commission for the Duke of Milan during the Age of Expansion, right? So tarot does definitely have roots that correspond with the Catholic Church during, the age of colonialism, and which is the age we live in, which is why it doesn't seem resource rich, but that's what it was. It was when certain kinds of colonialism were ramping up in the Americas and around the world. And in addition to that, there was also a revival of like looking towards Greece and looking towards Rome. And so those things were not considered anti-Christian if they were incorporated. So that's why we see so much classical, as they call it, influence on tarot, because it was, despite being obviously pagan, it was not considered a threat because it was part of European identity. So that's where we get all of this looking towards Greece. But of course, Rome looked towards Greece. Greece looked towards Egypt, where everyone, where those who were classically trained were trained. And so that's where we get some of the overlap there. We also should keep in mind that playing cards, from which the minor arcana come, do come through Egypt as well. Even though the Egyptian origin of tarot is not correct, the Egyptian influence in tarot is often understated, because that is how playing cards, of which, again, the minor arcana are inspired, come to Europe. So I say all this to say is that wands come from that influence in the magician and do initiate, right? So this is a more traditional reading of that suit. They correspond to spring into summer, and they're the quickest of the suits to manifest in your life. So someone asked me what I mean manifesting in one's life, like active work. No, I mean, like, let's say you pulled the Ace of Wands in your year spread, right? Like you're like, okay, I'm going to do a spread for the year or my birthday. If you pull the Ace of Wands, you can be pretty certain that those events will unfold sooner than had you pulled the Ace of Pentacles or Ace of Cups, because those are slower moving suits. Wands comes into our lives like fire. So for instance, even the 10 of Wands, which we'll talk about in just a second. So when Wands come into our life, they are ready to burn. They are full of energy, right? They are moving fast, often too quickly. And so when wands come into our life, we often don't have to wait for them to do their work as long as we would any other suit, right? Because they move more quickly than any other suit. And so, or even thinking about how quickly spring turns into summer, it's almost something that you will just kind of like fall into. Like it's sometimes you don't even notice the change as the days and nights heat up, which we'll be talking about next month, right? And the spirit that wands correspond to is often external. It's things we want to get done in the world. That doesn't mean there's no inner work that's correspondent, but I will say that when we pull these wands, and we pull a lot of wands, a lot of times our focus is outward on what we can achieve, accomplish, do, resolve, fight, right? Talk about, and also invent in the world. Very inventive suit. Tarot's cups have a more subtle approach to this, right? So they are one of the two suits that nurture in tarot, the other one being pentacles. So they're meant to nurture activity that's already happening. And yes, instead of like making something wholly new, which sometimes they do, there's certainly a creative energy that comes with the cups, but it takes a little longer to move into fruition, which is why I say wands invents, cups nurture. And in addition to that, cups are a slower moving suit, right? And so these are almost, if you think of the progression from wands to swords to cups to pentacles, it's like, okay, how do I take my passion and turn it into long-term stability, right? And a lot of things don't get there, but that is the order by which tarot takes us, right? From a spark of inspiration to a lifelong endeavor, and somebody who has the ability to take the best of whatever we start into as long as we want until we need to give it up. Sometimes too long, as the 10 of Pentacles suggests. So they are associated with water, intuition, and emotion. They are a natural choice for the more internal manifestations of spirit, right? So when we're doing internal work, when we're examining our own emotions, when we are looking inward towards our intuition, right? When we're getting an inner feeling of knowing, when we're experiencing the spirit inside of ourselves. They correspond with fall to winter, right? So when we're kind of like packing, planning stuff away and these kinds of things. And they often take months to fully manifest in one's life. So in that same reading that I talked about, right? For example, you know, you pull the Ace of Cups for your yearly reading, and you're waiting for a little bit, you know, for that to fully come to fruition. Now you might start doing the work immediately. Maybe you take a spiritual bath or you do some candle work, but like you're still going to be waiting for the end of that cycle for a little bit in a way that you're just not going to be with wands. So with the wands, that could be burnt out by the end of the week, 2 weeks. But with a cup, with the cups or pentacles, like you really will be waiting a while to see exactly how that's going to turn out. So let's go through them. Does anyone have any questions so far about just like the introduction? Yes, please.
So, my understanding is that it seems like cups and wands are connected to spirit, while pentacles, and I know it's like not so strictly delineated, but like body mind is connected to pentacles and swords. Would that be like I'm wondering about the pairings, maybe like pairing cups and wands and then pairing swords and pentacles. Is that mostly for like breaking up the lessons pedagogically, or are there relationships between those two pairs in and of themselves?
That's a really good question. Oh, sorry, please.
No. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I will say is that in these cases, I have kept very closely to traditional meanings. And how traditional are traditional tarot meanings, right? So we're talking about Etiela coming through the Golden Dawn. So we're not talking about 1,000 years of knowledge here. We're talking about 500, you know, like not even really yet. So traditional, still being created, right? We're creating tarot meanings together all the time. That being said, wands and water, wands and cups, they are both traditionally associated with spirit in different ways, right? We might say emotion for one, but that is sort of an understatement of what cups do, which makes sense because it's our most feminized suit, you know, like not feminine, but feminized, because it deals with emotion, intuition. And wands, you know, an association with fire, which is, you know, a spiritual element. I mean, they're all spiritual, right? But wands work with our spirit in a different way. It's not that pentacles, in terms of the soil in the body, are not spiritual, right? But the correlation of these two suits with spirit is part of what makes them harder to understand the essence of. And I find specifically that when people get deep into the wands, they're like, I don't even know how these cards are different from each other. From 7 to 9, I'd say, right? Like, it's just like, sometimes the way people teach those cards are just like, you fighting, I guess, instead of like talking about the ways that these interact with their own element, not just their suit, right? Not just the work of their suit or what they do or what kind of events, but like on a fundamental level. And in terms of swords, you know, sure, I guess like, yes, air, spirit, breath of life, things like that. But like really swords are our mind and our thoughts. And so they're doing a little bit of a different thing, but it's not that they're not spiritual. It's that I think that these are two internal, external manifestations of spirit here. And I do think that there is some traditional groundedness in that, and also experiential groundedness in how they show up in my work as a reader for the last 23 years. Does that answer your question? But it is pedagogically advantageous for me to break it up like this as well. Atanda?
Yeah. Following up with that, would you say it's sort of like capital S spirit versus lower S spirit?
I don't know that I think of lower S spirit ever. You know, like like you mean like our personal spirit versus like some sort of great universal spirit?
Yeah, well, that's a good question of what I think it means. It's sort of, yeah, well, I guess when I think of like capital S spirit, it's sort of like spirit is at the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
And like tapping into that,
mm-hmm.
the current of spirit versus like spirit, something less sort of like has spirit, but also has like, but not as the central element.
Got you. So I would say that wands are the spirit that we externalize, right? So that the spirit that we encounter by being in the world. And I think that cups are the spirit we encounter by being in ourselves.
Gotcha.
So not like big and small, short and tall, but like, here's what I apply my spirit to with wands. And here's how my spirit nurtures me. Here's how my spirit receives. That's another way to look at it too. Like wands are the spirit that give, cups are the spirit that has a more subtle, receptive internal way of being, right? In fact, cups give a whole lot. You know what I mean? Like what you gonna do without water? Not a lot. But wands have a different relationship to time.
Okay. Yeah.
And the world.
Yeah.
And mind you, when we do go through tarot suits, we are talking about a relationship to time as well. And for all of these, that's why, spring into summer, some things are quick and some things are slow. We're talking about a relationship to time through spirit, through all of them, right? Whether it's a lifespan like pentacles, like the life and death of our bodies, whether it's the life cycle of thoughts, which is like much quicker, right? And ephemeral when we're talking about swords, or when we're talking about the lifespan of action. So yes, I hope that helps answer that question. Both very good questions. All right, let's get into them individually. And I'm not going to, these will be provided. I will provide the slides for things just so you can review them. So the Ace of Wands initiates hasty action. We don't always do things that are going to help us immediately under the influence of the Ace of Wands, but we receive a lot of new inspiration, new information, and for some reason on that limited information, we're often roused to action from it. Like it's almost like if somebody's like, hey, I know, so-and-so is hiring, and you're like out the door, no resume, no nothing. I'm just going to go ahead and see, because that's been something you're excited about. Like you didn't know, but now you do. The Two of Wands is a very complicated card. And the way it's described by Arthur Edward Waite, who is one of the creators of the Smith Rider Waite deck, is that it depicts Alexander the Great having no other places to conquer, right? And so it comes to us when we've actually accomplished a lot. And when we're no longer thinking of the emotional aspect of it, no longer thinking of the ethical aspect of it. So even though this is, definitely a card that people sometimes romanticize, it's actually one that asks us to pause and ask us what it's all for. What's it worth now, right? So you have all this stuff. You said that you needed it. Now you have it, right? That's why the person is holding, at least in terms of the person who commissioned and helped design it, although did not draw it, thought about this card, right? That's part of why that's there. So, they're standing in a nice place. They're in a good place in their life, but like ultimately, what's it all been worth? Because you're there all alone. And so loneliness in these cards, like they really do tell you something. When somebody is all alone, like it's like, that's something to take note of because there's a reason. So it asks us to pause before we continue expansion. This is a good card to talk about burnout as well, because there's a level of enlightenment that comes with the Two of Wands. It's like, okay, well, you've done all of that and you're still having the same problems. Like you've done all that and you still feel like you have to accomplish more. You said that you'd be done once you got that last promotion. Why aren't you done? What's up with that, right? And so it's a reminder that it does no good to amass power and wealth without attending to the spirit. And so it reminds us that there's a gap between, very often this card comes up when there's a major gap between our professional success and our personal happiness. The Ace and the Two of Cups represent inspiration and connection. So the Ace of Cups makes us aware of our emotional needs and renews our intuition. It also resets our emotional clock so that we can be more spiritually present. And so the work of this unfolds certainly over more time than the Ace of Wands, as I said before. But it also feels more considered, right? Like, so Ayanna Van Zant has this book that, won 1 million Pulitzers in my home called One Day My Soul Just Opened Up. And that's very much the energy of the Ace of Cups, right? It's just like, I realized that what I was doing was hurting me and I decided I was going to do less of it. Now, the success of that has to do with other cards, other commitments, right? But the knowledge that something has to change emotionally and spiritually, right, is contained in the Ace of Cups. The Two of Cups asks us to connect with others on a spiritual level. This can be platonic, professional, or even romantic. And there's an element of being understood on a soul level. And so, of course, it's a lower echo of the Lovers. We see the caduceus. So there's healing aspects, right? This is a connection between another person, often quick, right? This is not, it's certainly not a promise of like long-term connection, although it's a good sign, but it's still very beginning, brief example, you know? But it promises that like something will be healed by that connection, or will isolate something to be healed by that connection. 3 and 4, expansion and celebration of wands, 3 or 4 of wands. So the 3 of wands watches us expand to new territory and become brave enough to tell others about our message. This is a card that comes up a lot for people who don't like social media, but find they have to use it. So where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to be on TV. So it actually has a traditional association with broadcast media. So when you're spreading the word and you're putting out an ad and you're hiring for a position, in our emotional life, a lot of times that expansion can mean, honestly, it can come with a lot of ultimatums. That's another traditional meaning of the 3 of wands. Like, hey, are you coming with me into this next phase of life, or are you not? Because I can't take any half stepping. And that makes a lot of sense when you get to the 4 of wands, which speaks to events that allow us to fill our spirit with those we love most, right? So weddings, housewarmings, baby showers, all kinds of stuff like that. There's just an air of celebration. And a lot of times there is like a granular event that happens, right? Whether it's going to someone else's party, whether it's a funeral, whether it's a wedding, right? Like that something happens where there's an opportunity for people to gather and value one another. And sometimes you're being asked to do that for yourself, right? Asked to get your friends together, asked to take some time and celebrate your progress. The 3 and 4 of cups, also group celebrations. I would say they're a little smaller, and also meditative isolation. So this is a very important turn in tarot. In tarot's cups is like the turn from the 3 to the 4. So the 3 of cups, like the 4 of wands, bring celebration and community into our lives. These groups are generally smaller and involve like our friends, the friends of our spirit, right? Like our bosom buddies. The 4 of cups does kind of the opposite, right? Where it's like, I need a second to listen to my own spirit, right? I'm going to take a bath alone. I'm going to go on a retreat. A lot of times this is a meditative experience, different from the 4 of swords, though very similar action on the surface, right? Where it's like, okay, calm down. A lot of times with the 4 of swords, you're being forced to slow down. And I think that that's important. With the 4 of cups, you're just kind of hitting an emotional wall where it's like, okay, well, I can't do anything more for you. Like, I don't even know why I used to enjoy this. I don't enjoy it anymore. And I have to figure out why, right? It's time to take some space and figure out what's going on with you. Now, the fives in tarot are very important, because if we think of the 10 as an outcome, right? As if the 10 is going back to 1, that means 9 is like our final, like what is, like our last look at this pattern that we have, which means the 5 is right in the middle. And they are cards of change. 5 is where things start to change. We start seeing the consequences of our actions. And so, or preparing for what's to come, as the 5 of wands shows us. So squabbles and success, that's what we're experiencing here. It's very important to remember that wands, they can get things going, but like wands alone are not going to lead to long-term anything. They really do live in the moment. So the 5 of wands watches us practice in many ways, right? Practice fighting, practice debating, practice, squabbling. It's important that we do this work a lot of times because it means sure that we're ready for real battles, right? So like when you're, testing the boundary, testing a friendship, right? Like where it's like, well, I need to know how you feel about this. Like I need to know which way you plan to vote, or if at all, right? I need to see that you are pro-Palestine. I need to look at it. We need to have this conversation, right? I may think I know how you feel about it. I need to know that you're wearing a mask, right? Like I need to know what you're doing in this regard so that I know if it's safe for me, and it doesn't have to get super heated, but it does have to be done. Now, the 6 of wands is complicated and people overhype it. This is one of the cards like the Lovers or the Empress, where people really overhype it. The 6 of wands is a temporary victory, but more than that, it's a flex. So it's like an opportunity to be king of the hill, right? But it may be a hill of beans, and it may not bring long-term happiness. An example of the Six of Wands may be like, let's say that you are someone who's really interested in having a job that makes people jealous. And so now you're a lawyer. Are you a happy lawyer? Not necessarily, but everybody's looking at you going, whoa, you're so great. You're a lawyer. Wow. Good for you. Right. But is it really a success, or do people just look at you as successful? And so that's something to always be careful with when we are experiencing the Six of Wands. One place I really don't like to see the Six of Wands, and some other wands that we'll get into, is love. I don't like seeing the Chariot in love. I don't like seeing the Six of Wands in love. It's usually a sign that you've been too competitive with your choice of lovers, and that other people have overdetermined what you believe a successful relationship to look like, and that there's not a lot of thought of how it's going to feel to be in that relationship. So as a and I mean friendships, I certainly mean friendships. I mean, romantic relationships. I mean, familial relationships too, like people who are like, oh, well, at least my kids are still speaking to me. It's like, but you're unkind to them, right? They just feel bullied. Things like that are with the Six of Wands. So the Five and Six of Cups are grief and mutual aid. So the Five of Cups is a card of grief. You have to do that. Like grief is a very important part of healing. It's a very important part of a life. And it can't be skipped just because other things feel better. A lot of times we feel stuck and resistant when the Five of Cups comes around, but that's exactly what we're supposed to feel, like it's like, well, yeah, you just knocked over 3 cups. That's unpleasant. We should be present with it. And in order for us to heal, right, we have to be present to that wound. And you can see the fluid that's coming out of these cups is red, right? Like, so there's a level of like great loss, of isolation. This is also a card of exile traditionally, right? So like being kicked out of the place that you used to call home, right? And the fives here, the Five of Cups and the Five of Pentacles, the Five of Cups, and the Five of Swords is much worse, but they're both cards of exile, right? They're like, oh, well, aren't you supposed to be helping me? Like, aren't I supposed to be part of that? And it just can't be skipped. But whereas the Five of Pentacles really talks about our body, and that's one of the reasons, like that's one of the few places in tarot we see disabled people, right? Is on the Five of Pentacles. There's a reason for that. And so thinking about like unattainable, what is unattainable for our bodies versus like, what are we like when our spirit is not getting what it needs? Right. In the same way that with the Five of Pentacles, what are we like when our body is not getting what it needs? So the Six of Cups, I feel like, is one of the most important cards for right now because it shows mutual aid in action. You can't see this because I have it blocked out, but like one of the things that people forget on this particular manifestation of the Six of Cups is that there is a person holding a pike on the side, right? So there is danger. There is a guard that's like keeping order. And these young people are sharing with each other despite the threat of violence or the possibility of violence, right? It doesn't ask anyone to emotionally bow like the Six of Pentacles, right? It honors everyone's dignity, and that avoids spiritual injury, right? So personally, I'm someone who grew up going to the church food pantry, right? And one day, the food was often very old and bad because, yeah, that was what it was, right? The food pantry was not well kept up. And I remember one day my great grandmother who raised me and I were very hungry. There was nothing left. And we pulled out this box of like very off-brand macaroni and cheese. And when we opened it up, moths flew out. And then we cooked it anyway, right? Because we're like, well, the moths are out now. And when we opened the cheese, there were moth eggs in it. And that's what we got from our own church, right? Where we was paying tithes and stuff. And so it was a injury. It was a spiritual injury, right? It was an injury to our dignity as people and our right to have nice food. And so the Six of Cups is sort of the opposite of that, right? Like where it's like, no, what I have, I will share the nicest parts of that. I will not give you dented cans and mothy food. I will not ask you to bow before me. I will give you what you need because you need it. And you're part of my community. And I'm responsible for you. So the 7 and the 8, these, again, now we're in the Wands wasteland where I think things get very confusing. So the 7 of Wands asks us to argue our point. It's generally related to the 5 of Wands in that way. And we were going to want to stand our ground. But the thing about the 7 of Wands is that you may not be right. right? So you really have to make sure that when you're pulling the Seven of Wands that you are in the right with whatever you want to argue. The Eight of Wands mostly brings us news, right? We'll receive information and make important decisions under that influence. And also a lot of times we're traveling. We are like traveling under the Eight of Wands it's usually like hasty, like you get a call one day and it's like in 2 weeks, you're going to be going wherever. And so that kind of travel often happens for work, and it does bring some expansion to ourselves and also helps us understand who we are in transit. So in the concept of, or in the process of things changing around us. And so aggression, information, that's the 7 and 8 of Wands. The 7 and 8 of Cups is a little more nuanced, right? So the Cups asks us to do a lot of leaving. And the leavings of the Cups are emotional things, right? So we're asked to leave certain emotional ways of being behind. We're asked to leave certain ideas behind. And in hope and in search of a better way of relating to our own feelings and spirit. So the 7 of Cups, it's a card of illusion. This is also a card of social media. I find that like influence of all kinds comes into the 7 of Cups. The more honest you can be with yourself, the better things will come out. The 8 of Cups proves that just because something doesn't feel good doesn't mean it's not good, right? And so we're abandoning what's working. We're doing hard work for our emotional and spiritual good. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the 9 and 10 of Wands are very important because they are our most literal manifestations of burnout in tarot. And so the 9 of Wands is actually a card about routines. People often teach this card as like a pause in struggle, right? A lot of times that'll be exactly what it says, a pause in struggle. But what does that pause look like, right? So you can see that this person is beaten down a little. You can see that they're standing guard. So there is a need for this person to take care of themselves without completely stopping. And that's one of the ways that one of the cycles that contributes to burnout, where it's like, okay, well, I have to take care of myself, but I can't stop doing what I'm doing. I can't take any time off of work. So I'm going to just, drink this ginger juice or whatever it is, right? I'm going to get a massage. And so there's a hope of that. But like with the 9 of Wands, there's an ask to evaluate your routine into, okay, 1 second, there's something in the chat. Checking your reinforcements for sure. That's what Atanda says in the chat. One of the things that's favored with this card are mind, body, spirit practices, right? So things that combine those things like meditative breathing, things like capoeira. And there's, a lot of different things from many different traditions, but this moment is meant to align the mind, body, and spirit because there's more to do. There's actually a lot more to do in this suit. The 10 of Wands is tarot's most literal sign of burnout, right? It appears when we've taken on too much. We may be micromanaging others or being micromanaged by others. We're trying to do the work of many people alone. We are rolling that boulder up a hill and it will crush us, right? Like the 10 of Wands is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. And we can feel it, right? When you get the 10 of Wands, there's no doubt. It's like, okay, well, I'm overworked. Yes. And the 9 and 10 of Cups presents an alternate idea, right? Like, whereas the Cups get better and better, I feel like the Wands are like, yeah, that's what happens when you start 1 million projects. You can't complete them. And that's part of why people don't start 1 million projects. 9 and 10 of Cups are self-satisfaction and community. So the 9 of Cups, it sees you getting what you want. People can be really smug about it. It is a card of manifestation. It is also a card of ego. And it's also a card that happens at the beginning of a lot of people's spiritual practices on their own, even if they like grew up in the practice, like now, like when you become an adult in whatever tradition you're in, it's like, yeah, look at me. I know so much and I know more than you. That's why I'm going to be sanctimonious about this. It is a wish card. That meaning comes from the 9 of Hearts as well. The 10 of Cups, however, is a sign of true community. It sees us connecting deeply with family, friends, and our environment that brings true spiritual happiness. And it's also a sign that we have a lot of different working relationships. So we have the 2 of Cups with connection with others, on a one-on-one basis. We have the 3 of Cups with our communities, et cetera, et cetera. We've left relationships that aren't working for us. We've grieved relationships that have ended, right? We've gone through a lot of different emotional experiences. And this is where we're finding ourselves now. The Page and Knight of Wands really teaches about haste and valor, but in a backwards way, right? So like, there's the Knight of Wands really is about haste, right? It's about moving too quickly to even know if you're doing right or you're doing wrong, or if you're doing halfway there, right? The Knight of Wands is fast moving and competitive. They're trying things out. You may be rebuilding your self-confidence, right? So this is a very good card to see when you're like working on your ability to make new projects happen, get a new job, do new things that feel hard for you, right? The Knight and the Page and Knight of Cups, illumination and propositions, right? So the Page of Cups is getting to know their intuition. They are working on their creative or spiritual development. The Knight of Cups is ready to share their emotions with others. They may be emotionally changeable, but often they reveal a hidden truth. Like somebody may be like, I really want to work with you, or I have a crush on you, or, you know, you reveal that as well. Or maybe your parent wasn't particularly emotional with you, but now they're like, you know, maybe I should have been another way, right? So a lot of times emotional information comes through in unexpected ways with the Knight of Cups. The King and Queen of Cups are very themselves, right? They really are two of a kind. And their balance is about popularity and power. So the Queen of Wands is a better leader overall by far, because they can be trusted. They may be like an influencer, and I mean, not like someone who markets other people's stuff, although there's nothing wrong with that. But somebody who's very influential in an office, even if they are not the boss, right? There's someone who has a lot of soft power. They understand their own moods and sides, and they can be a very benevolent person in your life. If you've ever worked in academia or a nonprofit, this is like the card of like middle-aged women who like have the keys to the kingdom, but like are not getting paid nearly enough. Like they are absolutely often moving under the Queen of Wands, because everybody knows that they need them, and thus that they have outsized influence to what you would think they did. The King of Wands is great in business. Don't like to see them in emotional relationships of any kind, because they're very selfish and they're very schemy. They follow their own passions. And if you're running a business or doing something like that, especially if you own your own business, they're great to see. But they can be very brash, and they don't necessarily consider the feelings of others. The King and Queen of Cups could not be more opposite. The Queen of Cups is a natural intuitive, can be overgiving, very nurturing. They live in two worlds at once, and they often have to be reminded to come back to the physical world and nurture their own needs, because they also have a body, right? So that's one of the reasons why it's good to see cups with pentacles, right? In the same way that it's good to see wands with swords, because things are being expressed, moves are being made, but also pentacles, because it just balances them out. The King of Cups is a drama queen in the best possible way. They have a lot of emotional control. They're often found in places where a little bit of theatrics is needed. They know exactly when to make a scene. Very good and important king to see, because they can weather the storms of life. Like if you're in the middle of, like, let's say someone, heaven forbid, knock on wood, but like when a loved one dies, like the King of Wands is King of Cups is an ideal person to see, because it's like, I can grieve this, and I can get the will together, and I can do the lawyer stuff. You know what I mean? Like I can like maintain myself and also give to others emotionally. Okay, questions, comments, concerns, thoughts? Nope. No problem.
I have a comment. It could be a question depending on if you want to respond. But I thought it was very interesting. The 7 and 8 of Cups, the way you describe them is really different from how I've heard them talked about before, which is great. The 7 with all the different things, I always thought was sort of more like indecision or dreaming of all these things. But your take is more, it's an illusion, like none of those things are real. And then the walking away, you were like, this is a good thing, but you're walking away from it. I always see that as like, you did say you still have to go. But it's complicated, I guess. Those were interesting.
Yeah, when I think of the Eight of Cups, I'm really thinking about like leaving bad situations, like letting friendships go. And with the Seven of Cups, I wouldn't say that nothing is real, right? Some of the stuff definitely is real. But in a way, even the real stuff is an illusion, right? So like, let's say, with the bronze head, you might get the bronze head. It's really a bronze head, but it's made out of plastic, right? It's just spray painted bronze, for instance. We got something in chat. Ames, just taking it all in. It's a different way to see the cards for me. I like it and am thinking about how to incorporate this into ongoing notes about of the cards. Awesome. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about spiritual hygiene real quick because there's a little bit of homework there. And then we will have just a little bit of time for questions if there is some on the docket. So this will go quick. So we'll talk about caring for spirit. So again, these slides will be made available. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about different ways to keep up with your spiritual hygiene. And one of the homework assignments for this week is to do the spiritual hygiene calendar in your April workbook as well. I thought it really helpful to schedule spiritual hygiene because I'm forgetful. Like that's just the truth of my life. And then I'm like, well, why am I feeling sad and tired? And it's like, well, think about it. So the first one we're going to talk about is baths. They're a first line of defense because they're infinitely customizable, right? Bathing customs, spiritual bathing customs depend on your tradition. And so I'm going to keep it vague here. But what I will say is as an herbalist, many baths require a strong herbal tea. And a strong herbal tea, a medicinal herbal tea cannot be achieved without steeping it for at least 25 to 30 minutes, if not overnight. If it's aromatic, it needs to be covered. That's all I'll say about it, right? And the rest is depends on your tradition. Smoke cleansing, right? So it's great for entering ritual headspace. Personally, I smoke cleanse my head and my cards every time I read. Clearing physical rooms and homes and working with objects that can't get wet, like tarot. Sprays. Now, I keep a spray right here. I believe in it because a spray is like a mini bath, but it's also like a little reset, right? Like you can get your little rose water spray. You just feel brand new. So aromatherapy, physical reattunement, or as an oil or perfume, if you're not in a low scent space or scent sensitive space. And it's also good for clearing spaces in places that can't have smoke, right? So like places that you're going to set off the smoke detector or whatever. Teas. I believe in tea. I believe in it very strongly. Rodale's Herbal Dictionary is great if you're like, I don't know what I can work with. Like, I don't know the properties of things. Like, I always suggest a book. And if you have, when in doubt, or even when not in doubt, talk to your own doctor, right? I'm certainly not going to recommend anything here because we all have different bodies and different practices around that. And we live different places, right? But Rodale's I recommend because they're very overprotective. Like they're like, is coffee poisonous? It's like, all right, yeah, that's a good place to start because they'll be telling you stuff is poisonous and you're like, I think you just mean a stimulant or whatever, but that's all right. Like, let's just, if you're beginning, right, you don't want to poison yourself. So it's a good place to start. It's also really great for things that you feel are located in certain parts of the body. Candle work. Candle work is often a layer that we put on top of other kinds of spiritual hygiene practices. Fire is, as we talked about, is like a physical manifestation of spirit for some folks, or like a physical representation of certain kinds of spirit. So that's something to think about. And also meditation, prayer, intention setting can be layered with other spiritual hygiene practices and also alone. For some people, it can be helpful to write down what you're going to speak over yourself before you do that. And also what's written can be worked in other ways, including tarot, playing cards, and oracle cards. Lenormand cards as well, which are playing cards, but still. Anything else anyone wants to add?
Can you say a little bit more about that last slide? I feel like to write down what you'll speak over yourself before doing so, what's written can be worked with in other ways. Could you give an example, a little bit of how you might do that? I mean, I think I have a sense, but I'm just feeling a little fuzzy.
You can burn it up. You can drink it if you use an edible ink, right?
Okay.
Whatever's clever, right? Like, I think that especially with the way that, each of us work, I'm sure we're working in our own personal traditions. And so you got to engineer it to work for you, right? It's part of the reason why I'm not going to be super prescriptive there, but
sure.
Yeah, lots of people will burn it, right? So you'll write something down and you'll burn it. Maybe you'll use a bay leaf, right? Or work with a bay leaf. et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you'll write it in the dirt and plant something over it, right? Like there are lots of different ways that can look, both according to your tradition, the needs that you have, and your interests, right? And how fast you want it to work.
Hmm.
Does that answer your
Okay.
question?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Whenever we're working in that way too, I recommend for some people, for other people, let it fly. But writing down what you're going to do and really visualizing it can be really, really helpful for that kind of thing. Other questions? Okay. So here's a spread that we don't need to do right now in the interest of time, but will be in the slides, and I'll make this into a picture so that it can be transposed into the module, a freestanding. But this is a spread for starting a spiritual hygiene routine. I certainly use it myself. I always pull when I'm doing something like this. So what approach to spiritual hygiene do you need right now? What plant or mineral ally can help you with this goal and another plant? And how you know you've reached that goal for spiritual hygiene or the state that you're desiring. Any questions about the spread? Yeah.
How will you know, like, how do the cards communicate plants and minerals?
Oh, that's such a good question.
I'm like, oh, I actually don't know.
No, thank you for asking. So there's a lot of different ways you can think of it, right? So there are planetary correspondence for herbs, just generally. Yeah, and also elemental correspondences. There's also tastes and things like that. But it can also just be like something you associate with one thing, right? So like, let's say if you're pulling the 10 of wands, you may need something to calm you down, right? So maybe you want chamomile. Maybe if you're pulling the 5 of cups, you're wanting something for grief, right? So you may reach for violet. Or it may be you pull the empress, and so it's something that your mother really enjoyed. Like red rose tea, even. Just regular tea leaves. Any other questions? So this week, and this goes along with the spread, I encourage you to find 3 plant allies from your tradition that can be worked with for your spiritual hygiene practice. So that corresponds with the cards you pull. Local and indigenous to where you live is ideal and abundant, right? So not rare or going extinct or endangered. For example, rosemary has been called on for protection and expansion in many traditions. So it's not like you're like, oh, is this appropriation? It's rosemary. So in this case, depending on how you work with it, right? Could be the manner could be, but like, rosemary alone is not generally going to be. And you can add this information to the spiritual hygiene portion of your April worksheet. Any questions there? And this is just you doing research. You don't have to ingest it. You don't have to work with it in any particular way, right? Like it's just in whatever is prescribed when you do this pull for yourself. And now I'm going to make like 2 minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions before we get out of here? Please.
I have a question about developing sort of like our own connections or relationships with the cards based on like this grounding, which I'm really excited about. But I'm wondering if you have any guidance for how to go about doing that or thoughts about that.
Yeah, something that I always say about reading cards is that like all of the different methods are just kind of intersecting with each other all the time, right? So this is not so much a method as a framework, right? For talking about mind, body, spirit. And so that's what the work with tarot we've done here so far is that, right? So looking at it through the lens of our energy, our time, our work, right? And that's only one piece of how we can see tarot. So I think that, this entire course is structured around burnout prevention and moving through burnout, right? And so I would say when we're incorporating this particular lens, it's about whole person care, right? So like, how do we preserve ourselves? How do we know, for instance, like with the 8 of Cups, like we just spoke about, how do we know when to leave a job that it's asking too much of us? You know, like, how do we know when to say goodbye to duties that are no longer filling our cup? How do we know when we've taken on too much stress, but we feel like we still have to say yes? How do we know that, we're ready to abandon traditional ways of taking care of our bodies for something maybe more spirit-led or esoteric, right? So those are the questions that I think that this methodology or this lens kind of asks us. And it can be layered with like more traditional meanings, although these are pretty, like, I care a lot about the history of tarot, right? Like I talk about it, I care about it, not because I think it's great, but because I think it's extremely complex. And that I think it's often not great, and that we sort of paper over it to get to the part that we like, which is the reading tarot, right? And so when we're looking at this method, I'd say like all the other methods I'm sure you've already learned, right? Like where like it plays a part, it's not always applicable, but there are times when it's extremely applicable and helpful. Does that answer your question, or am I off base here?
I mean, you're not off base. I think I was thinking about something more specific around, like, if I'm like trying to work my way through each of the suits and then start making kind of my own connections. But I think what you said about like thinking about it through the framework of whole person care, and then maybe using that to help create my own like connections to each of like the cards and the suits, using what we're talking about, I think has given me something really helpful to think about. So yes.
Especially because they're all doing so much, and our intuition, right? Like the spiritual part of tarot is like how we discern between one or the other. Because like, let's say like, and this is like, let's say this is a person named Kwame, and, you know, they're going through a breakup, and they're also in a job that really burns them out, right? It can be hard in that moment to know if this, you know, Two of Cups into 10 of Pentacles, 10 of Wands is about the relationship or about the job. But that's where intuition comes in, right? That's where the spirit comes in. So you may need two different lenses for each of those questions, and you'll know when to use or to work with each. Any other questions? And feel free to jump out if you need to jump out as well, but I'm going to hang out for a second and answer some questions if people have them.
I was thinking about the spread, and I'm thinking, I mean, a lot of those other tools are less, I don't know, intuitive to me, but I mean, besides like plants and crystals or stones and things, I do mess with. But I haven't taken, I've never tried to like do a ritual bath or anything. I've done a little bit of cleansing, but I sort of feel like I don't know what I'm doing when I'm doing it. So I was thinking I might adjust that spread to have like one of the cards be about the plant or element, then the other one might be about like some of the other tools and how to use them. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it has to work for you, right? Your spiritual hygiene routine has to work for you. It's not one size fits all. I think that it's like an opportunity for some research too. Like especially for, hopefully folks are working in a specific tradition whose history they're inquiring about, that has a lineage of work, where they can be like, oh, like this is what my ancestors or, folks who are my elders in my tradition are working with. And this is how they're doing it. And I will do that too, right? Because I know that we're coming from different backgrounds of practice. So it's definitely not one size fits all in that way. And also practicing ethically requires research. It just does. It's unfortunate because sometimes it's like, I ain't got that kind of time, but like it does. And especially with plant medicine, because it's, plant magic, because it's new information is constantly coming out. And also things are dying because of colonialism, white supremacy. Like things are being over tapped, right? And used, right? Like, my teacher, Amanda David, always taught me to avoid saying like, use a plant, right? Because there are people on this earth who are using plants, right? And, like that's the reason why, people's whole harvests of ginseng are being stolen by pharmaceutical companies who now feel like ginseng is just the best, right? So we know that people are using plants. And so, when we research, we're able to develop different kinds of relationship with our plant neighbors, which is exactly what we'll be doing all next month, is develop, and not just herbalism, right? Like, but developing a relationship with the earth that sustain us, which is also part of a spiritual hygiene. So like I said, it's plants or minerals. So that could be a rock, that could be a crystal, that could be any number of things, right? Lots of stuff has minerals in it. Salt, it could be salt, Epsom salt, right? It could be any number of things. Yeah, that gives you that kind of response. So please do play around with it, make it work for your own tradition. It's a starting point, not, salt for sure. Salt's everywhere. I love salt. And they make like real fancy salt too, like that flake salt. I love that. A little fancy salt. Any other questions before we get out of here? All right. Please.
Not a question specific to today, but just generally wondering what's your philosophy on reading reversals?
Yeah. Why do I talk about this, a ton? I love talking about reversals because they're much more recent than reading tarot itself, right? So first, when we think of reversals, we're thinking of the work of Etiella. And Etiella actually was a pretty middle-class person as far as tarot goes, because we're usually talking about people who are rich as fuck. But Etiella is like the person who made the correspondence with seasons and elements and astrology for tarot, right? So that's all the same guy. Etiella Aliette, you might find that person listed either way because they just like spelled their name forward and backwards. Okay, so also something to know. I cannot read tarot reverse. There are 78 cards. Why do I just don't feel like I have to? That being said, I do have 3 methods that I will. Do I have them handy? I have 3 methods for reading tarot reverse. So the first one is back. So returning to the last card. So let's say you're on the 5 of Cups. So that might mean that the work of the 4 of Cups, that meditation is not done yet. There's bigger. So like an intensifier. So if you have the 5 of Cups, it might mean that you're experiencing more grief, longer, less healthy grief, more internal grief you feel like you can't express, right? And then there's beneath. So, and that's like a call to that shadow work of that card. So like, what's keeping you from grieving, right? What's the shadow side of grief, right? Like how is your grief being acted out on others? I have an article about that on my website called how and why to read reverse tarot cards. Rashonda Tremble also has a really good blog on reversals on their blog as well, on Stay Woke Tarot. So, but I know people who read reverse. I would say my only major rule of thumb with tarot reversals is if more than half of a spread is reversed, I don't read it reversed. I'll read a reverse if it comes out and it's like, okay, that definitely has to be reversed, or if I intuitively feel like it has to be reversed. But beyond that, no, I don't. Do you have a follow-up question or anything?
No, I'm just appreciating this. I know my personally feel drawn to read reversals, but not always clear about how. So how you laid it out, actually, it's like, oh, I have options. Oh, this is great. Thank you.
There are also reversed card meanings, like in Jane Lyle's the illustrated book of tarot, which I swear by. In fact, I've read that book so many times that it has fallen apart. Like I literally can hold each sheet individually because I've had it since I was 14 years old. And then there's the book by actual Arthur Edward Waite, which is called A Pictorial Key to the Tarot. And then there's another one in 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. So lots of good places to find, the alternate meanings that are a little, more different. But I think that like, for me, the methods work. I mean, I know the reverse meanings of tarot cards as well, but I feel like the methods like keep it more consistent and keep from like sort of doom and gloom readings of reversals. Cause I think that sometimes people make reversals out to be too much, like I feel like they can do too much with the reversals that I don't personally ascribe to, but you might. So you have lots and lots of options. And I'm going to write myself I've taken my pen and I put it somewhere. I'm going to put this reversals blog. I'm going to put it in the module notes for this when I post this video on Tuesday. Awesome. Anything else? All right, it's been a pleasure. You'll hear from me twice this week. Please don't forget, because when this video goes up, I'll give you an opportunity to watch that on the module. And then on Thursday, our next module for next week drops. So you have more than a week to do that. And you know where to get in touch with me if you have any questions. Yeah, bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.